Coming up for our next talk, we've got a couple of very interesting characters here. We have Mr. Charles Rolls, who in 1997 acquired quite a large stake in a certain gin, Plymouth Gin, actually, I'm sure we all know it. And then he went on to co-found Fever Tree Tonic after that in about 2003. And then we have another gentleman who's full disclosure, I've known him for quite some time, one of my first industry pals, Mr. Simon Ford, who back in his day defined what it was to be a brand ambassador when he was working with Plymouth Gin. And of course, now he's the Director of Trade Marketing and Brand Education. And that's what he used to do for Pernod Ricard. But then he, of course, co-founded the 86 company with their namesake Ford's Gin, to name one. And of course, they've got a large selection of wonderful brands too. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about gin and tonic, shall we? Gentlemen, please come to the stage. Mr. Charles Rolls and Mr. Simon Ford.
Hi there, thank you for coming to the talk. Just briefly, the whole idea of today is I really want to get into this mind, because in 1997, no one was drinking gin. And this gentleman was way ahead of the curve. And of course, you've only been able to see 1,000 gins today at today's show, you know? So what does it take to be ahead of that curve? And of course, when Charles sold Plymouth Gin, he moved quickly onto something that he saw was missing also, and that was good tonic. And so the idea behind today is to get inside the mind of an entrepreneur standing next to me. And then, so Charles is going to do a quick presentation on Fever Tree. We're going to do a little Q&A together, and then we'll open it up to you if you have any burning questions that you would like to ask. So without further ado, Charles.
Thanks, Simon. So how do I get the screen? Here we go. Let me introduce you straight away to a couple of brands that I have been very close to. First of all, Plymouth Gin, and then, of course, Fever Tree. And it has been an astonishing show for me to come and see here the number of gins that are out there, and of course the number of tonics that are out there as well. And it hasn't always been that way. And at the moment, I'm aware that in Europe, 1,000 odd gins, like Simon says. Extraordinary situation. And in the UK alone, 340 gin distilleries. Quite astonishing what is going on in this market. And I'm sure a lot of you got questions about sort of where next. But let me take you first of all back in time a little bit. Let's see if this thing will work. If I take you back to 1997, when I bought into Plymouth Gin, at that time, I was reminiscing with a guy who was in the industry, still is in the gin industry. We were struggling to come up with more than 10 names of distilleries for gin in the UK. And there were a handful of gins, even globally. I don't know, for the people who have been around this industry for a while, there were a couple of brands like Junipero, which is still out there. There was a gin called Leiden Gin in a nasty green bottle, which died a very nasty, slimy death, as that kind of monster deserved to. There was another one called Van Gogh Gin, which has been out there, fallen away, and now with the resurgence of gin has kind of come back. But we're talking about a tiny handful of entrepreneurs who had seen gin as an opportunity at the time. But there was an interesting thing going on at the time. When I went out to the States, vodka and premium vodka was this extraordinary phenomenon that was happening in the United States. So you had Belvedere Vodka, that everybody in this room is going to be well aware of. And they had burst onto the US market at a premium price in that beautiful glass bottle with that cutaway in the front with the Belvedere palace at the back, with a great story about provenance and how this brand was made, and they were taking the US market specifically by storm. And that gave me great hope that there was something that could be done in the category that I was now really interested in, which was gin. But going back even further, this slide Is that slide still on? Is it still around? Yeah, great. This is the Savoy cocktail book. This book was written during the era of Prohibition, when the Americans were having that great, great idea about doing away with alcohol. Well, that didn't last very long. And whilst the Americans were having a lean time making bathtub gin and worse, and poisoning themselves with what they were distilling at home, in London, in the American bar at the Savoy Hotel, people were going crazy with these wonderful cocktails. There are 28 recipes in this beautiful old book that are all about Plymouth gin. And so I looked at this as something of a Bible. That picture, if we can just come up with it again, I just want to talk about it because I think it's...
I do have to say that my first day on the job at Plymouth Gin, I was sent down to the Savoy to try all of those cocktails. And Peter Dorelli sat with me, and we literally drank through 27 of those cocktails together. I didn't make it to the last one.
But look at this, isn't this beautiful? The image of the guy, the 1920s guy, taking a sip of his cocktail, probably a martini, a gin martini at that, and it's going straight to his heart. And I just think that imagery captured the sort of excitement that we're all still experiencing now in this fantastic gin renaissance that's really been happening here. And so that was one of the real inspirations for me during that journey with Plymouth. And obviously, for me, I learnt a lot. We used to take people down to the distillery, which is England's oldest working distillery. Not Britain, because the Scottish distilleries are older, but it's England's oldest working distillery. And we'd take them down with a competitive set at the time, the most exciting of which was Bombay Sapphire, which had done phenomenally well around the world by promoting itself, particularly in duty-free and in some of these upscale locations around the world. And you could show them in individual wine glasses the difference between Bombay, Tanqueray, Plymouth, Beefeater. That was pretty much the competitive set at that time in 1997. But at the end of it, everybody would want a gin and tonic. And you'd have to then reach for you-know-who, that brand in the yellow label. And every time you put that into the gins, you couldn't even tell which gin was at the bottom of which glass. And that kind of gave me the idea, redoubled when I went out to the States to look at the quality of tonics out there in the States, which were even worse than the ones in Europe, that somebody had to create. There was a massive opportunity for someone to create a tonic that enhanced rather than destroyed the best gins. And Tim Warlow, my partner now of, I think it's a long time. It's 15 years we've been working together now, came to me to talk about gin. And I'm very, very happy that during that conversation, I suggested to him that actually it wasn't gin that we should focus on, it was tonic. And at that very first meeting, by the end of it, which was about an hour long, we had already sketched out the basic idea of a plan to simply come up with the very best tonic water as the first silver bullet, we used to call it. Can I move on a slide? Since then, obviously, Fever-Tree has had some success. We're selling more than 360 million bottles and cans in a year, so that's, that's 1 million a day that are being drunk around the world from many production facilities. We're in 72 markets around the world, and I'm still delighted when people send me the occasional picture from, I don't know, somewhere very far away with a picture of our tonic water. Extraordinarily, perhaps for some of you, it's extraordinary for me to think about this, that actually in the UK now, we're actually, in market share terms, larger than Schweppes, who were quite clearly the brand who had upset this industry, along with, at the time, I'm sure Diageo would admit, Gordon's, they had taken the market down. Their gin had gone down to 37.5 ABV, and no love had been given to it. The tonics had been taken down, they'd taken the expensive sugar out, and they'd replaced it with saccharin, which is a very cheap ingredient, and they'd got away with it in various markets. And that was what was wrong with the producers for gin and tonic, and then it was down to the bartenders who had no love. And so you would go to have a gin and tonic, and it was a tumbler, it was probably dirty, it had one lump of ice in the bottom, it had a bit of sulfurated lemon if you were lucky, and then they would put an optic full, I'm sure you've all seen these optics, of a pretty average gin, and then fill it up with one of these tonics. How to kill one of the world's greatest drinks, that was how. Bad ingredients, bad serve. And so by the 90s, this category was nearly finished. We've done the opposite. We've given the world the first really great tonic water, which enhances. It's not overpowering in its aroma. It's very soft on the tongue and on the taste, and that has allowed these gins to express themselves. And we've had a good time. I mean, I've got to hand out credit to the likes of Hendrix, who came onto the market just a little bit before Fever Tree launched. And out in Spain, we would see premium gin and premium tonic, with the chefs out there all celebrating this, and we saw a phenomenal growth. What is it based on? It's based on ingredients. No one was focusing on these ingredients in the story I've told you to date. Tim and I started with a clean sheet of paper, very different from Plymouth Gin. I was constrained with what I could do with Plymouth. Tim and I were not constrained with what we could do with Fever Tree. We could literally say, if you're going to make the world's finest tonic water, how would you do it? Small glass bottle, crown cap so you can't reseal it. You can't have that awful, flat, old tonic water. The finest quinine in the world. So that was Tim taking the bark off the cinchona, the fever tree in the Congo, which is where you get the finest, purest, natural quinine in the world from. And it is that obsession with going for the very best ingredients that has kind of underpinned everything that Tim and I have been doing. I'm going to go to this so I can see what I'm doing. Yeah. While Tim was very bravely in the Congo, I had decided that he could go on his own. I would go very bravely to the south of France. That's me in the hills there for the lemon thyme. That was Sicily. It's an orange and lemon grove on the slopes of Mount Etna, because we're using these finest oils in our tonic waters. And then for the cola, this is me in Madagascar. But it's that kind of obsession. It was that kind of going out there to find the finest ingredients, no matter where they came from, and no matter the cost. Because in truth, we're using the nose and the tongue are tasting parts per million. So even though our ingredients can cost 10, 15 times the cost per kilo that our competitors were using in those days, the actual cost to us of doing it is surprisingly low. So going out there and changing the entire way that whole industry had worked. These ingredients, such as, I'm going to show you a bit later, one of the gingers that we're using, the only other users of that at the time was the perfume industry. No one in the soft drinks industry was using that kind of quality of ingredient. And the other thing we've done is we put some choice back into this industry. And we've got some tools and ideas which people have been telling us have been very useful to people to understand which of our brands go with which of those enormous array of gins that are out there, by helping people to categorize some of those types of gins. So you have down there, for example, the Juniper Rich, the robust gin. So those would be the original gins, like Plymouth, like Tanqueray, like Beefeater. And there, of course, you can use the Indian tonic water, the light tonic water, but also the aromatic. And so we had a clear chart that we're helping people to understand, and we've had a lot of feedback that this has been a very helpful way for people to find their way through this very and increasingly complicated gin and tonic market. We built strong partnerships right from the beginning. It was part of the kind of strategy that I wrote out with Tim at the very beginning. I used to run Plymouth. I wanted a great tonic. I knew that if there had been a great tonic while I was running Plymouth, we would have used it. So I knew this was going to work. But day 5, we went down to Park Royal, to Diageo's head offices, and said to them, look, we're a nothing brand. We're just starting. We have an idea. Here is the bottle and what it's going to look like. Now, you have Gordon's, and that's going to work with Schweppes, and we get that. But you also have Tanqueray, your premium. Surely you're not going to let Tanqueray work with that same tonic. We're going to give you a premium tonic, natural ingredients, that is going to taste great. And within a year, Diageo was spending €1 million with us in Spain, because we were the premium catalyst to try and help that brand, Tanqueray, that enormous brand, to re-establish themselves in that premium space. So, it was thrilling to see that a company like Diageo really got it straight away. And we've also worked with some very minor brands and fantastic promotions. We had co-promotion of the century, we feel.
Thank you.
Engaging tastemakers has been a big part of it. You know, the chefs, the sommeliers, the bartenders, these have been the three groups of people who have endorsed this brand from the very beginning and have been fantastically helpful. And this is just an ongoing process. The number of meetings that we're having with the spirits companies, the enablers, to get this still working as a catalyst within the industry, it continues to be a lot of work, but it's been very rewarding. These are some of the outlets that we are in around the world, of which you'll know some of them. Some of them are not all owned by Donald Trump. But you know, it's a good set of locations where this brand is now to be found. We've also started exploring this idea not just of gin and tonic, but also saying we can do the same job in mixers in the brown spirits area, and not just brown spirits, but things like tequilas and vodkas. So we are out there finding the finest gingers. So on the left-hand side there, I mean, if anybody buys ginger, if you go down to your local supermarket, you will not recognize that as being a ginger root because it'll probably be white and anemic. This stuff is brown and full of flavor. And they harvest this stuff in the Ivory Coast, and the very next day they're pressing it to get these oils out of it. And we're using that quality of ingredient in our ginger ales, where we've got some fantastic expressions. If you haven't seen them, still time to rush down to our stand, and the ginger beer. That is the kind of lengths we're going to, and we're also developing this idea of the pairing wheel there with these brown spirits, because we're seeing some really interesting things happening, and also our spirits partners are really interested in working with this. The trends we're on are premiumization around the world, drinking less but better quality, and mixability. And these are powerful trends that we have been tapping into and working with our spirits partners around the world. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's had some appeal. On the left, no prizes for who's on the left there. Harry and Meghan had it at their wedding, although I did promise we wouldn't tell anybody that, but it looks like I've lied on that promise. And on the right, does anybody recognize that picture on the right-hand side? It's only going to be a Brit, I'm sure. But if you don't, this was a bank robbery, a bank heist, where these old guys had drilled into a diamond vault in London. And the police thought they knew who they were, so they set up a trap for them. And this is a secret camera in that brown bag on a bar in North London. And they are also drinking Fever Tree. So it's a very broad church that we have, from convicts to the royalty. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. That's Fever Tree.
I think sometimes, you know, we take it for granted, you know, just hearing Charles's story there about, you know, how well Fever Tree is going. And I know that most people in this room must have heard of Plymouth Gin, but when you start these things, when you are the only person doing it, the world's a very lonely place. And I got a sense for that, actually, when I first started with Plymouth Gin, because I was working for a company that had Absolute Vodka and had Chivas Regal, and they wanted the distribution of Plymouth in the United Kingdom. And I was the newbie, and I was the young kid, and everyone was loving how cool they were selling Absolute Vodka. And so they're like, all right, we'll give Plymouth Gin to the newbie. Now, the great thing for me is I love gin and tonic, so I'm like, I'll take the gin. Now, it was the best opportunity in the world for me, because while there was a person for just a region of London on Absolute, there was just me on Plymouth. So I got to travel, and it's one of the best things that ever happened to my career. But what I noticed is I was walking into places, and no one even wanted to talk about the topic of gin. It was very hard for anyone to, you know, answer me unless they were one of 7 craft bartenders, you know, who were really thankful to have someone talking about something other than vodka. So it is a lonely place when you are the only person doing it. In 1997, when there were only those gins, it's very difficult to suddenly get your foot in the door when you are not on a trend. It's much easier when you're the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. And so that's what this is about. I was actually asked by a journalist yesterday that I was doing an interview about gin with, and they asked me the question, what's the most important gin launch of the last 20 years? And I said, Fever Tree Tonic. Because it has helped out gin brands express themselves ever since that moment. And of course, with the wave of new tonics as well, trying to you know, become Fever Tree, that's happened. So without further ado, I'm going to do a little Q&A with some of the things that I wanted to get from Charles's brain, about being an entrepreneur. I guess the first being, what's your second favorite tonic? Yeah, don't plug it.
There are other tonics out there, did you say?
No. So you spotted 2 new gaps. Are there any gaps now that you're sort of noticing and seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really sure there are, but let's not write off the whole gin and tonic thing as well. I think I do sense now that I'm sort of reading things on websites and blogs that people are saying, the steam is kind of running out of gin and tonic a little bit, and there are so many brands, 1,000 brands. How can this work? But it just takes me back to when I was starting at Plymouth Gin and out in the United States, and we would go out there and look at vodka. And within, I suppose, by about 2002, there were over 1,000 vodkas out on the US market. Everything from bubblegum vodka, extraordinarily poor things. But it hasn't mattered because the category has carried on motoring. The category is what really matters here. And there will be some expressions that don't work, and there'll be others where people really get it and drive it the right way, market it the right way, that it kind of carries on. What are the other ones? I mean, look, God knows. I mean, obviously, the issue of the month is kind of cannabis. Is cannabis going to have some sort of big impact on this industry? Yes. Will it be positive or negative? I mean, who really knows? Am I going to be doing anything in it? No.
I was going to say, are we going to see a cannabis-flavored Fever Tree coming soon? I do have some people on the Forge Gin team that want me to do a cannabis Forge, that's for sure. Yeah, not going to happen. So what is it that drives you, to be this entrepreneur, this energy, like going into a place where no one is in that field and taking that giant risk, and knowing the world's going to be a lonely place for a second? What is it that drives you to go there and see these things?
I think, look, there are a lot of entrepreneurs in this room, I hope. And I think there is this balance between kind of risk and reward. And there is the freedom, which has always been of huge appeal to me, not to have kind of walls around what I could do. And I found working in any of the big corporations that I worked in my early career just so constraining. I wanted to do something, but it kind of wasn't allowed. You hit a wall. And that freedom I adore. I love the sense of excitement when you get that first sale. And I don't even mind the hit when you get that rebuff, because somehow that kind of galvanizes something in me and makes me say, I'm not going to accept that. Let's try a different tack. And I think that is to be balanced always with the risk. I really do. I think, I really respect that. I think I was, I was never going to be on the street. And, so I really respect the guys who are the real entrepreneurs who really start with nothing and they really could lose everything. I take my hat off to them.
It does remind me of that saying that, entrepreneurs are the crazy people that will want to work 80 hours from themselves so they won't have to work 40 hours for somebody else. That's kind of how it goes. So were there moments when it could have all come crashing down? Were there moments where you're like, this is not going to work? Were
you there when I took that first container load over to America, the first container that had been there since 1955? I decided, we found an importer in America. I had this brainwave. It was brilliant. I was going to repackage Plymouth Gin in the same way all the malt whiskies did, with a cork in the top, so that when you open Plymouth Gin, it was going to go, and you were going to have that immediate oral as well as visual idea and cue that this was premium. We were taking this brand premium. And so I got these corks. They'd been tested. We'd done tests to make sure they wouldn't leach any color into the gin. I had written agreements with all the kind of Portuguese guys that they'd been triple washed and everything. And it seemed fine. The accelerated tests, they seemed fine until I arrived in America 2 months later to go to the relaunch of Plymouth Gin in America. And an American comes up to me with a bottle of urine in my gin bottle and says, is it supposed to look like this? And I think that was probably the worst moment of my business career. But we got away with it because the Americans didn't actually know that it didn't look like that. So I said, yes.
I actually do remember one disaster on Plymouth is when the warehouse for the United States was in Kentucky for a minute, and all of the labels went out. And with the heat of Kentucky, the glue melted, and every label actually melted off. So it happens. Being an entrepreneur is, if you ever think it's going to go well, it never shall. So, I mean, that's the disasters that can happen and overcome. Do you have any sort of regrets, moments that you didn't take an opportunity?
I mean, really, in these two brands, I mean, really not. I think, there's been a good slice of good luck, and you need kind of some good luck along the way with these things. But really, in terms of things that I wished we had done with these brands, no. I mean, I'm really glad that I didn't listen to what I wasn't supposed to do. I mean, I wasn't supposed to go to Asda in the United Kingdom and sell them all my old stock, which was dead stock, and get a big deal with them and have the brand in Asda, which is it's a pretty lower end supermarket for those of you who don't know that in the UK. I wasn't supposed to do that. I was supposed to launch this brand, every premium brand, in the on-trade. But then there's the real world. And actually, I got £100,000 out of selling that stock to Asda. And unbeknownst to me, they went and advertised that in the Daily Telegraph on a full-page advert about the price that you could buy Plymouth Gin through Asda, and these things saved the brand. So I can't think of any particular regrets.
That's great. For me, those moments are the moments that actually, when you have to think on your feet, become that business person over what is right for the product, right? Then that's what you sort of demonstrated there. Is there sort of a balance between the passion for the product and business experience that you have to strike, when doing this?
Yeah, and the other guy who should be here is Tim, and I think really it comes down to also one of the most powerful things entrepreneurs can and should do is sort of recognize who you want to take along with you on this journey. I couldn't have done this on Fever Tree without Tim and now the team. We have an extraordinarily powerful team, and I think entrepreneurs need to realize that. I think one of the things. There's a phase when you start off being an entrepreneur, it's all passion, and you're just really hoping you break through, you get that first sale, you get that first breakthrough. What happens thereafter, entrepreneurs often don't think about, which is how are you going to build this to something which is now starting to work, but to something that really is working. And there is an enormous amount of work. One of the main things is hiring really great people to come along on the team, because there's only so much you can do. And I would really say, getting the right person, I think two good brains, in my experience, both at Plymouth and at Fever Tree, has been absolutely one of the keys to the success.
So who's an entrepreneur in this room or wants to become an entrepreneur? Show of hands. So I think this this one is definitely, obviously for you, this question, because I'm an entrepreneur myself, and I think that I perhaps sometimes think small. I'm like, I have no intention on being the world's biggest gin brand. It wasn't the case. It was just I want to make something that I think people would like and enjoy. Now you have the world's biggest mixers brand, or one of the certainly premium. And did you ever think it would get this big, or was it just I just want to do something that's good and nice and high quality? Was there, or is it we're going to be the biggest?
We started off with an idea that there was a real opportunity, a really important opportunity, and I could see it in the UK and I could see it in the USA. I could see it, I thought, a bit less in Europe, but then various things happened. And we had, at the same time as us, this, as I say, Hendrix were putting a lot of effort into the market. So we had the premium gin that people were talking about, and we had the premium tonic. And then we could see there was kind of an explosion that was happening in Spain. First of all, in that kind of northern crescent, and then all the way around Spain. So the Copa Ballon and the ice, and then the garnishes. This, really, to any Spanish people in the audience, I'm giving you a a personal thank you for the way that your culture took that idea on and transformed it into something really, really special, which actually, interestingly, we don't really acknowledge. We don't acknowledge it in England. Certainly in America, they certainly have no idea the whole garnish idea came from Spain. So I think I'm rambling a bit on that one, but...
No, so, you know, as someone that's recently become an entrepreneur for the first time, right, and it was a very scary prospect for me. For 4 years, I've pretty much either worked from an airport, been on planes going to the next meeting, or when I'm at home, sometimes I'm in my pajamas and then I find it's midnight again, you know, and because I've just been on the phone and I've just been doing emails, like work, work, work. Is there advice on how an entrepreneur can strike balance? So is there a moment when they should stop working? Is there, you know, I mean, you have hobbies and things. Is there a way that you can take your away, even if it's for 5 minutes, from thinking about the stresses and strains of having a business in those early years?
Even in the early years, there was a clear kind of end of day almost every time. It was great to feel sometimes on a day that you'd really achieved something, that you'd kind of really moved things forward. But there were many days when you didn't, and yet still, I think both Tim and I managed to take time out. We both had families, and I think we have managed to get that kind of balance about right. And you know, to go back to your first question, do we think it could get that big? You know, one of the other major things that happened, which undoubtedly was of enormous help to us, was that the major competitor around the world was Schweppes. It was Cadbury Schweppes, and in 2008, Cadbury Schweppes was under such pressure that they had to sell their business. And it was then fragmented, and so the ownership of Schweppes, our major competitor as they are, and would always have been, is now in the hands of many, many companies. So now Schweppes in America is owned by Dr. Pepper Snapple, and it's in nasty PET dumpies, and it's pretty much as nasty as you can get. In some of the European countries, it's owned by Suntory, and they're doing a much kind of better job. So, you know, that has undoubtedly was a moment when suddenly Tim and I could say, do you know what? We are now globally the best coordinated brand out there, and we're going to drive this forward. And that was 10 years ago.
Wow, that's an amazing moment. So I'm assuming most people are obviously, we're at a bar convent, are doing a business that relates to drinks. This is probably one for you too. I've got a couple more questions, then I'm going to open it up to the floor. But is the on-premise still the best place to grow a brand? Or, you know, what is the avenue now, given it's such a cluttered space?
Yeah, so if you're a premium brand and you are in the hands of one of the real big majors, that's what they'll do. And why will they do it? Because they have the distribution into the pinnacle on-premise, and they have the money. And that means they can actually afford to buy that bar space if they need to, and they've got the cash flow that they can supplement. They can have red ink on their P&L for 2-3 years if they've got an idea. Now, how many entrepreneurs in this room have got the money to have red ink all over their P&L for 2 or 3 years? And so I would strongly say, be realistic. This world is very fast moving now. It's very much changed. It's a dream if you can start just at the pinnacle, on-premise, and work your brand slowly, slowly, grow it, grow it. The real world is more like I experienced with Plymouth Gin, that I desperately needed money, and I found a way to sell it through Asda. And you know what? In the short run, that was a brilliant idea. Actually, 3 years later, I was cursing myself because I was trying to get the price up with Asda. So I'm not saying it's the right thing that I did, but I got away with it. And as an entrepreneur, I think you've got to do what you feel you can get away with. The other thing is, a lot of these retailers, they're very premium. You know, people now go in there of all walks of life, and they're now looking for their premium whiskey, their premium gin, and they're going to buy it. They're going to buy it at Edeka or Rava or, you know, the equivalent in the United Kingdom. They're going to get it at Tesco or Waitrose. And so never turn your back on opportunities. Think very hard before you turn down any opportunity for distribution and sales.
So there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there. These halls are full of them. Is there anything that you've seen other people doing that is really impressing you right now?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. I mean, some of the stuff, I mean, I've got to say, I think some of the stuff that you're seeing on these entrepreneurial booths in terms of how they're embracing Some of these niche areas are very impressive, but all the way right through, I've got to say also to the likes of the big producers out here, and how they're giving you these sort of sensory expression ideas on how these brands are actually you're reacting to them. And I think so. There's some great stuff that I'm seeing.
So what's next for Charles Rolls and Fever Tree, right? You know, is Fever Tree just going to continue being the greatest mixers company? Is it acquisitions? Is there new things that you might invest in? Anything that you've seen, or is you're going to run the course for Fever Tree?
Simon, this is a public company I'm speaking on behalf of, so I am not giving out any ideas on what we're planning to do to do next. I'm sorry.
So that's great, because one thing that has never occurred to me, right, in being an entrepreneur, you know, like as an entrepreneur, there's two worlds that I think about, and one is hopefully someday someone will offer me a stupid amount of money that I can't say no to, or the other is I can turn it into a profitable business. But floating a public company, now that's never even entered my brain anymore. Did you start and think that might be a possibility?
More than that, it's something that I really drove, because we had experience of private equity, and I was interesting just from the previous speaker hearing about, you know, what do you get from money and private equity? Well, our experience of private equity was it was fantastic for 6 years. And then when they came to want to sell the brand, you know, a little green goblin jumps onto their shoulder, and you are in a difficult place as an entrepreneur. You know, if you've got these shareholders who are financial shareholders, they want their money, they want a return. And if your company's doing well, you're going to be under the cosh much more quickly even than if you're doing badly, because they can see that their fund is going to be able to make a lot of money out of you, and they're going to try and sell your business. And I got to say, it was a very protracted and painful experience selling out the shareholdings of that private equity firm. Much as we liked them and respected them in the early years, that was a very painful. I never wanted to do it again, because we had to necessarily take our eye off the ball for a full year whilst we did that. And so as soon as it was done, I was talking to Tim saying, look, I think we should be going for a float on the junior market in the United Kingdom. And you know, the truth is that was a so much simpler process than going through private equity. The due diligence that had to go on in private equity was enormous. Actually, in a float, all you do is you put in you put all the ingredients into a mangle, you turn the handle, and out comes a price, and you either say, yes, we'll go with it, or no, we won't. And everything else is market. Your contracts are market. Your salaries are market. Everything is so much simpler. So far, so really good with this float.
I love that. So is there a formula to being an entrepreneur in your mind, or is it just is it the Wild West?
No, there really is not a formula. I mean, I really take my hat off to another kind of type of entrepreneur from me completely. You know, I think I was a consultant. I went to INSEAD. I do kind of go through, do I think it's going to work? I've met entrepreneurs who I don't think they've ever even tried that. They just are sure they've got an idea that's going to work. And some of them are the most successful entrepreneurs in the world out there. So I don't think there's any formula. I think we're living in an era where there are more people doing more entrepreneurial things probably in the Western world than ever before. And I think it's an incredibly exciting time. There's money that is possible to gain much more easily than was possible maybe 20 years ago. So I think we're in a great, great space. Of course, the difficulty with that is you've got more competitors who are out there trying to do and find every little niche that you're into. But hey, good entrepreneurs will find it.
Is there one piece of advice you would give to entrepreneurs, or was there a piece of advice that's the greatest piece of advice you received that helped you on your way? Anything that you might share with us that is a good North Star for us?
I mean, I do get asked this, and I never know.
I ended with the boring
I never know the right answer. I think ultimately there is only one thing, that is, once you have kind of looked at the downside and made sure the downside isn't going to ruin your life if you decide to leap onto the entrepreneurial thing, once you're sure that isn't going to be a thing, then it's a matter of just, you've got to go for it. There is no other way.
So this is sort of my last question now, right? And it's sort of one as it pertains to me really in the sense that, you know, I started a business 6 years ago, and you know that every now and then I call you up and I want to go for lunch. And then I use this lunch as a moment where ultimately pick his brain and ask him questions about my business. And like, it's almost like a therapy session for me. and I've seen you to be a great mentor, and both sort of seeing how and what I learned when I was at Plymouth Gin, seeing Fever Tree grow, which Charles knows this, but the small amount of savings that I put aside for my daughter's college ended up in Fever Tree stock. And now she has more money than I will ever probably see for myself in my life, which is great. She can afford university, which is good. Thank you. But do you see mentorship as an important role in business? Have you had yours in this?
Yes, I do. Although I flippantly once sort of remarked to a journalist that I didn't think it was important, but I do. And I think how to find them is the way that you did. I think one of the greatest advantages I had was having worked in the gin industry. I could see there was an opportunity for tonic, and I really sort of believe in that kind of get stuck into an industry. That's the only real way the majority of people can see what needs to be done from within. Clearly, there are those complete mold breakers, particularly in tech, where they are looking way outside and coming up with completely new ideas. But I think that's also where to find your mentors. In this industry that we're in, you will know the good people out there, and you will know how to approach them. And if you've got a great idea, there's every chance they're going to be interested in helping you.
So that's my questions, done. And thank you, Charles. And I'm going to open it up on the floor. So I want to tell you one of my favorite stories that, for me, you got to go back to a 24-year-old myself, and I've just taken this job with Plymouth Gin and yet to meet Charles. And you call me up and say, we need to meet and we need to have dinner. Now, Charles has a hobby, which is flying. He goes, can you get to this airport? And so I, sure, I can get to this airport. Never heard of it, but I'll get there. And this small little jet, like, sort of lands. No, jet. It wasn't a jet. Propeller plane. That's right. It was a little Cessna, I think. But it lands. He said, where do you want to go? And I'm like, I don't know. What about Le Manoir Quatre Saisons? And I'm like, well, that's the most famous restaurant in England at the time, and I've never been to a Michelin star restaurant. I'm like, sure. So great. Do you want to bring any friends? We call up Colin Appiah, for anyone that knows that guy. We go and pick him up in the plane, and we went there. And that was my first meeting with Charles at Plymouth Gin. And one of the most sort of amazing experiences, to kickstart my career in gin. And so that's how it's always worked for me. I call up Charles, and I know it's going to be a good lunch. So, does anyone here have questions? It's not very often that you have, someone that's taken a company this far in front of you to have be able to ask a question to. So, if you have a question, raise your hand. Great.
I remember when you launched Fever Tree, I was working at Southern Wine and Spirits in California, and the sample budget just blew me away. How did you decide what percentage in the beginning, and how did you fund that, and how did you rationalize that with your partners and investors?
So just say the quick question.
The inordinate sampling budget that you launched Fever Tree with.
The speakers. Was this to do with Plymouth or Fever Tree?
Sorry, Fever Tree.
Fever Tree. Was this? Are you talking about recently? Because we've just signed a deal with Southern Glazer Wine and Spirits. Is that the one you're talking about, or you're talking about a long time ago?
Trade shows. 8 years ago, 7 years ago. I don't know how many years ago, but stacks and stacks of Fever Tree everywhere, all the time.
Right.
And I just thought, who in the world has this much money to throw into the market?
Well, it's kind of you. I mean, I don't actually remember the specific thing, but I imagine we would have launched there with our Indian tonic, maybe the light, maybe the Mediterranean. I don't actually remember this particular occasion.
What percentage of sales was it in the beginning? Do you remember that? What percentage of sales was your sampling?
Was in the USA at the time? Oh, small. I mean, right now the US is about 20% of our sales. Yeah.
I will actually say, from an entrepreneurial point of view, that sampling is the cheapest way. Having people taste your product is the best way, and it's also one of the least expensive ways to actually market your brand. And it's certainly, in my opinion, the right way to do it, because if you you're putting your money where your mouth is, like try my tonic water or try whatever product it might be. And you've made it, it's a cost of goods thing for you. I think that that's the right way to build a brand, in my personal opinion.
More
Any
questions? All right.
Hi, thank you for the presentation, first of all. With the new and lots of upcoming tonic brands, premium ones, Tom Hardy's, Franklin Fentimans, are you worried that they're going to take away your market share, or you confident that your product is going to stand alone for a long upcoming time?
Look, anybody who's relaxed and ignores competition that's a very bad place to be. You know, we spend a lot of time looking at our competition. I can only really say that I know what we're about. I know what we're doing. I know what we've done. I know that we set out to really try and change the market, to try and give bartenders and consumers some really great products. And we've shown the way. And of course, there are many, many people following us now. One statistic in the United Kingdom, where I've got good data at my fingertips, is that I showed you that slide where we were 40% market share in the UK and Schweppes were 30. Well, all the other premiums of the ones that you were some of the ones you were mentioning, all of them combined represent 4%. We're 40. So, look, I'm never relaxed about competition. I think you're always alert to what's going on. It would be a really nice thing if the competition actually started to help us and break through some barriers. Maybe the competition can break through in Russia first, and then we can cruise in behind them.
Hello, thank you. Fantastic presentation. I have a question regarding regarding your branding and this massive brand equity that you have. What would you say was the main factor or the main driver in building the brand and reaching this global scale? I mean, I saw you had distribution in Iceland, in Australia, so I'm just curious as to what is the main factor in the branding.
It's the broad marketing mix, and by the marketing mix, I mean the product, the package, the price, the distribution channels. It's absolutely everything. I think, if I say what I think as a team we've done very well, I think we got the product, the marketing right. All of those elements that make it up. I mean, from day one, when it was not day one, but from the first success within the supermarkets in the United Kingdom at Waitrose, the package spoke for itself. It told the consumer it was getting pure quinine on there. It gave them an idea that this was something special. The package spoke. There was no marketing budget. In the restaurants, I think, we've done a good job there. But I think it really is every element. To single out any one element of that sort of sales and marketing mix, I think would be wrong.
I want to say something that I observed about Fever-Tree, which I think is brilliant, and I would call it consistency of messaging. I still see out there on the stand, it's if 3/4 of your drink is the mixer, then go for the best. I probably got it wrong, but you're still using that to this day, and it's still the most powerful message.
I think it's a powerful message. It is, no doubt. It appeals to the thinking man and thinking woman, and they are the ones that we want to be drinking Fever-Tree. It says, we've thought about it. It's obviously right. No one else has mentioned this before. It is a very powerful message. But again, so many elements have been important. It's a bit like Plymouth. If I look back at Plymouth and say, why did that really work with the bartenders? Probably, I think, one of the most important things we did was that idea that I'd had with the head distiller to go to 41.2% alcohol by volume. No one else had done that. You had Tanqueray at 47%, which was ridiculously expensive at the time. And then you had 37.5, which was clearly wrong. And so what we did by going that first thing about 41.2, it was on the package. If they couldn't remember anything else about what we said about that brand, there was some reminder that we had done something unique, and I got that played back to me in exactly the same way now. I'm getting the 3/4 message played back to me at Fever-Tree, as that was one of the most important things we've done.
Anybody?
Thank you very much indeed for attending.
Okay.
And
All right. All right, let's hear Charles Rolls and Mr. Simon